My husband, who was on an overseas assignment, was going to temporarily return home, and we decided to have a dinner party at the house where our son's family, who I live with, resides. We were having a pleasant conversation in a friendly atmosphere when our grandson, Daniel, suddenly changed the situation with a single remark.
Today isn't Grandma's punishment day, so you can eat, right?
Despite my best efforts to keep it together, I couldn't believe it was all ruined by a single word from my grandson. I was stunned and could only look down in silence. My son and his wife tried to cover it up in a panic, but the more they talked, the more Daniel revealed the truth. In her fluster, Kyla finally snapped. "Enough. Just be quiet for a bit." She yelled at Daniel, making him cry. Then,
"Don't just yell at a child."
Nelson's raised voice turned the dinner party atmosphere tense in an instant. Amid the silence of the living room, broken only by Daniel's sobbing, Nelson demanded an explanation from Caden. All the while, I was hugging Daniel, comforting him. In my arms, Daniel said,
"I'm sorry, Grandma. Will you get scolded again because of me?"
He was worried for me. What should I do now? I could only stay silent, holding Daniel tightly. I am Elizabeth Pratt, a housewife in my 60s. Nelson and I fell in love while working at the same company, so it was really tough until we decided to get married and I quit my job. In those days, without phones, it wasn't easy to exchange contact information, and there was a general attitude of keeping workplace romances secret. So, until we got engaged, I was always on edge, worried that my boss might find out. Even after our engagement, we struggled with seating arrangements and speeches for the wedding, to the point where I didn't know who the wedding was for anymore. Moreover, any slip-up could lead to Nelson, who stayed with the company, being subject to snide remarks later, so we couldn't afford to relax. However, thanks to those struggles, we are now bound by a strong bond. I realized this especially when Nelson's overseas assignment was decided, leading to us living apart. 3 months before his departure,
"I think I can come back within 3 years, but I'm worried. Why don't you come with me?"
I appreciate the thought, but at my age, moving overseas is too much. Unlike you, I can only speak English. Nelson was always worried about leaving me alone in America. Besides, if anything happens, Caden and his family are here, and we can always talk on the phone, so don't worry too much.
"Yeah, you're right."
Caden is our only son. 14 years ago, when Caden started university, he moved out to live on his own. After graduation, he met Kyla in the cafeteria at his workplace, and they got married 7 years ago. 2 years after their marriage, our grandson Daniel was born. Caden, who rarely came home when he was single, started visiting regularly after Daniel was born. Both Nelson and I always look forward to seeing Caden's family. But beyond that, our time as a couple was very peaceful and enjoyable. Especially, Nelson planning trips for us during his long holidays made me happy.
"I've been busy with work and left everything at home to you. From now on, let's spend more time together as a couple."
He would always take me to the places I wanted to go. For us, this was the first time Nelson had to live alone for work. Moreover, since it was overseas, returning home wouldn't be easy. It was understandable that Nelson was worried. However, if anything happened, Caden's family, living just 15 minutes away from the nearest bus stop, could help. So I always reassured Nelson that there was no need to worry. About a month and a half before Nelson's departure, I injured my back and had to go to the hospital. It was a mild case of a herniated disc, so I could manage going to the hospital and maintaining minimal daily activities on my own. However, to Nelson, who was about to leave, it was a major concern, and he said he would delay his departure until my back healed. I appreciate the thought, but it's not something that should delay your work.
But I can't leave you alone like this. What if something happens?
I tried to reassure him, but Nelson was adamant about not leaving me alone. Days passed with our discussions going nowhere. We're both adults, so don't worry about something like this. If anything happens, Caden and his family will help. As usual, I was trying to convince Nelson. Then, he had a flash of inspiration and said,
Caden. That's it. Let's ask if you can live with Caden.
Ha! Nelson immediately called Caden, and explained my back situation and his overseas assignment. After hearing the story, Caden said,
I understand. I'll talk to Kyla, so give me a moment.
He then hung up. I thought it was impossible for them to agree to such a sudden request to live together. However, Caden's answer was completely opposite to my expectations.
Kyla agrees too. It's only for about 3 years, right? That's no problem at all.
I see. That's a relief. We should thank Kyla soon. Caden, take care of your mom.
So, I ended up living with Caden's family, pushed by Nelson. Caden's wife, Kyla, worked as a chef in the same company cafeteria where she met Caden. A year ago, they opened their dream restaurant and both worked hard together. I'm sorry for asking you to take care of me when you're so busy with the new restaurant. A few days after deciding to live together, we had a dinner with Caden's family. While Nelson and Caden were chatting and drinking, I quietly apologized to Kyla. I thought it must be a burden for Kyla to take care of an injured mother-in-law for 3 years, especially at such an important time for her restaurant. However, Kyla said, "Don't worry about it. We help each other in times of need. Also, once you feel better, could you occasionally look after Daniel?" Kyla asked me. He's in daycare, but he's always alone from evening to night. Seeing Kyla's apologetic expression, I understood why she agreed to live together. She probably wanted me to look after Daniel. Of course. If there's anything else I can do, don't hesitate to ask. I replied with a smile, and Kyla also smiled, relieved. I was truly relieved that I wasn't just a burden. Living with Caden's family was more peaceful and comfortable than I had expected. Not only did they accept me willingly, but they also provided me with a room of my own since they had an unused one. Wanting to be of help to Caden's family, I started doing the laundry, washing dishes, and picking up Daniel from daycare. I also began cooking dinner in place of Kyla, who often worked late due to preparations for the next day. Caden and Kyla always expressed their gratitude, and I could spend all my time with my adorable grandson. Although this cohabitation started on Nelson's sudden whim, I was truly happy and spent each day grateful to my husband and son. However, this happy time did not last long. The trigger was an innocent comment Daniel made during dinner.
I like Grandma's food better than Mom's.
Oh dear. Thank you. There was no way my simple home cooking could surpass a professional chef, but to Daniel, who had parents running a healthy restaurant, my American-style cooking might have seemed delicious. Additionally, Daniel proudly mentioned that he could eat vegetables he usually disliked if I cooked them. I praised Daniel, telling him he was amazing. To be honest, Daniel's likes and dislikes were very similar to Caden's when he was a child. So, I just made the dishes that Caden liked, and by coincidence, Daniel ate them too. However, this seemed to have struck a nerve with Kyla. If you like Grandma's cooking so much, why don't you have her cook for you every day from now on? Kyla's expression was calm, but her tone clearly indicated she was angry. Both Caden and I sensed that saying anything unnecessary would be unwise and continued eating in silence. However, 5-year-old Daniel didn't notice this and said,
"Really? Yay. I get Grandma's food every day."
He was overjoyed. Seeing Daniel's reaction only made Kyla's mood worse. Since then, I started preparing all meals for Caden's family. Being a housewife, cooking was no burden at all. The problem was that Kyla's gaze became increasingly sharp as she watched Daniel and Caden enjoying my food. Moreover, Daniel began to call for me for everything. Bath time, reading stories, getting dressed, drawing, bedtime, no matter what it was, he called for me. I responded happily because I loved my grandson, but Kyla might have felt as if her child was being taken away. "Elizabeth, please don't spoil Daniel. This is why old people are annoying." "Oh, I'm sorry. I'll be careful." Before I knew it, Kyla's attitude towards me had become cold and filled with resentment. For months after my husband went overseas, Kyla came to me with a proposal. "From today, in lieu of rent, you will do all the household chores." When I asked why she suddenly said this, Kyla explained that it was unfair to provide food and utilities for an additional adult for 3 years without compensation. She wanted me to repay this inconvenience through labor. "Your back pain is healed, right? Then from now on, work properly." Her cold gaze and matter-of-fact tone left me speechless. Was this really the same Kyla I knew before living together? Though I was terrified by how much she had changed, I decided to comply silently. After all, she had a point. Expenses had increased with one more adult in the house. I understood her desire to offset this through chores. I resolved to be more considerate of Kyla and reduce her burden. By doing so, I hoped she would calm down and things would return to how they were. At that time, I genuinely believed that with effort, we could restore our good relationship. However, this hope was soon shattered. When I folded the laundry, I was scolded for doing it poorly. When I washed the dishes, I was berated for doing it badly. When Daniel showed affection towards me, I was accused of bribing him with food to win his favor. No matter how hard I tried to be considerate, it only seemed to provoke Kyla more. Still, I continued to handle household chores for the sake of my son and his family. The only solace I found was that Daniel and Caden enjoyed my cooking and finished their meals. However, even this soon became a problem. What's so great about this old-fashioned home cooking? It's bland, unattractive, and inedible. After saying this, Kyla would head to the kitchen, cook a meal for herself, and eat alone. The atmosphere at the dinner table was icy, as if we had seen a ghost. I was too scared to move, fearing what harsh words Kyla would say next. Daniel, sensing the tension, lost his appetite and left his meal unfinished. When dinner ended and I stood up to clear the dishes, Kyla called out in a cold, low voice, "Elizabeth, sit down for a moment." Dreading the reprimand, I sat back down and cautiously looked at Kyla's face, which was more hostile than ever. "I'm a professional. When I cook, it incurs a cost. Do you understand?" "Yes, I understand." I forced out a response. "Since you made me cook outside of work, you need to be punished." The word punished sent a chill down my spine. What more could she do when I was already feeling so broken? With my fingers growing cold and clammy with sweat, I waited for her words. Kyla twisted her mouth into a sneer and said, "No food for you tomorrow," before leaving the living room. I was momentarily stunned by the lack of insults or verbal abuse. Is this really all? I had never experienced such a light punishment, which made it all the more frightening. The next day, when I actually went without food, I quickly understood the severity of this punishment. Even when I felt faint with hunger, I wasn't allowed to rest from household chores. Moreover, I still had to prepare meals for Caden's family, my stomach constantly rumbling. Running errands became a battle against fainting from hunger. I began to think that enduring her insults at home was far better than this. Such punishment occurred 3 times a week. Caden, who could have been my only ally, was too busy appeasing Kyla to be of any help. In fact, he had recently started joining Kyla in berating and exploiting me. The only consolation I had was my grandson Daniel, but even that was restricted since Kyla would scold him if she saw him being kind to me. I had to limit my interactions with Daniel to the bare minimum. The room that was meant for me had turned into a storage space, leaving no place to stretch out and sleep. I had become less than a burden. I often thought of returning to my home to escape this treatment. But the thought of my husband worrying about me overseas kept me from acting on it. At most, it would be 3 years. If I could endure, everything would be fine. Living in constant fear of Kyla's anger, I continued my hollow existence. A little over a year after my husband went overseas, one day he called.
"Hi, Caden. It's sudden, but I'll be back next week for a short visit. How about we all go out for dinner?"
Next week? That's too sudden. How about we have dinner at our place instead?
"Sure, that sounds good. By the way, how's Mom? Every time I call, I'm told she's busy with Daniel, so we hardly talk."
"Yeah, she's fine. We'll see you next week then."
Caden ended the call abruptly. At dinner, he shared the news with Kyla and me. Kyla looked visibly annoyed, but I was secretly overjoyed. Since my husband went overseas, he had only called a few times in the early months. I thought he was too busy to call, but I had been very lonely. On top of that, Kyla forbade me from calling him, so I could only wait for his calls. I worried about whether he had any injuries or illnesses, or if he was overworked. Next week, I could finally confirm these worries. I felt a surge of life returns to me. However, seeing my excitement, Kyla became furious. "What's with that happy face? Are you implying I'm the bad guy here?" "What? No. I never said that. Shut up. Don't talk back. You're being punished again today. Confused and upset, I was denied food once again. For the week leading up to my husband's visit, on top of household chores, I was forced to help with the restaurant's preparations and distribute heavy flyers. Don't come back until you've handed out all the flyers. She would kick me out of the house. The treatment was harsher than ever, and I was on the verge of collapse daily. What had I done to anger her so much? Too tired and hungry to figure it out, I spent each day even more careful around Kyla. Finally, the day of the meal with my husband arrived. I prepared his favorite dishes and waited for him at the entrance.
Elizabeth. I missed you. You've lost weight and look pale.
That's not true. You look exhausted too. His sharp observation made me nervous. The past week had been so punishing that I was truly on the brink of collapse. But I tried to hide my poor condition so as not to worry him. Still, my husband's concern deepened as he continued questioning.
I've been calling regularly, but you never answer. Has something happened here?
What? Regularly? Since when?
Since I went overseas, I've called twice a month. I was always told you were busy with Daniel.
I had no idea he had been calling so frequently. As I stood there in shock, Caden and Kyla emerged from the house. They greeted my husband with smiles and led him to the living room. Daniel, waiting there, excitedly ran to my husband, who was delighted to see his grandson after more than a year. This heartwarming scene made me momentarily forget our conversation at the entrance. Soon, Kyla announced the start of the meal. As everyone took their seats around the table, enjoying the cheerful atmosphere, I found myself standing alone a little distance away, out of habit. Noticing this, Kyra called out to me in a flustered tone. Elizabeth, what are you doing? Please sit down quickly. Startled, I hurried to sit down. My husband watched this scene with a curious expression. If I make another mistake, I might suffer more severe punishment later. With that thought in mind, I decided to focus on assisting my husband by serving food and drinks. Thanks to this, the meal continued peacefully without any further incidents. Just as I began to feel relieved, Daniel, my grandson, remembered something and spoke up.
Hey, Grandma doesn't have punishment today, right? It's good she can eat.
Daniel's cheerful smile caused Kyra and Caden to turn pale, their hands and shoulders trembling, their eyes darting nervously. Anyone could see something was wrong, but they forced smiles and desperately tried to cover up Daniel's words. The more they talked, the more Daniel, oblivious to the situation, kept speaking the truth. Panicking, Kyra finally snapped. Just be quiet for a bit. She yelled, causing Daniel to burst into tears. Seeing this, my husband raised his voice in anger.
Don't shout at the child like that.
The pleasant meal instantly turned tense. In the now silent living room, only Daniel's crying could be heard. My husband, with a voice lower and heavier than I had ever heard, demanded an explanation from Caden.
I spoke to Elizabeth earlier, and she said she didn't know about the bi-monthly calls. What's going on?
Well, that is. I mean.
Facing his father's stern demeanor for the first time, Caden was visibly shaken. My husband's persistent questioning led Caden to confess everything about their treatment of me. Throughout this, I held and comforted Daniel. Despite fearing more scolding from Kyra later, I couldn't leave my sobbing grandson.
Sorry, Grandma. Will you get scolded because of me?
I gently stroked Daniel's head. Don't worry. Daniel, you did nothing wrong. I reassured him as best as I could. After about 10 minutes of questioning, my husband, overwhelmed with disappointment, buried his head in his hands. Discovering that his son and daughter-in-law had been mistreating his wife was hard to believe. Adding to his distress was the fact that he had proposed the cohabitation and had supported the restaurant's opening. The shock was immense.
I trusted you both, which is why I supported Elizabeth living with you and helped with the restaurant funds. What were you thinking?
After pondering for a while, my husband suggested ending the cohabitation. He also demanded the immediate return of all the living expenses he had sent during this period. Hearing this, I was shocked. What? Wait a minute. What living expenses?
You didn't know about that either.
Seeing me shake my head, my husband looked even more dejected and glared at Caden and Kyra. According to him, when the cohabitation was arranged, it was agreed that he would send $300 monthly for my living expenses. Caden was supposed to inform me about this arrangement later, but I had never heard anything about the remittance. Instead, I had been told to work to cover living costs and had been treated like a servant. Upon learning this, my husband, in a steady and grave voice, demanded Caden return all the money.
All of it. The restaurant funds and the living expenses. Return everything.
Hearing this, Caden and Kyra turned pale and began apologizing, even bowing down to my husband. Kyra explained that despite 2 years since opening, the restaurant had been struggling, which fueled their resentment toward me for living comfortably with Daniel. Caden admitted to keeping the remittance for themselves and preventing my husband's calls to hide their actions. Although they apologized and promised to change, my husband's anger did not abate. He took me back to my family home and, during his short stay, retrieved all the money he had given Caden and Kyra. Before his departure, he arranged for me to stay at a business hotel, ensuring my safety until he could return from overseas.
I'll arrange to come back to the US soon. The hotel staff will keep you safe until then.
Though I felt staying at home was enough, I agreed, not wanting to worry him further. Hotel life proved to be comfortable, and my health and spirits improved remarkably. In less than a month, my husband returned. The hotel bill was staggering, but he was relieved to see me looking healthier. I felt profoundly grateful to have such a caring husband. Back home, Caden and Kyra frequently visited, pleading for more financial support. However, the trust once broken could not be restored. Their restaurant, struggling even more, eventually closed within 2.5 years. Their dreams shattered, and their marriage fell apart. Kyra left, taking only her belongings, leaving Caden with their son, Daniel. Caden, now burdened with debt and child-rearing, turned his life around, finding a new job and working hard. To support him, I began caring for Daniel again. Though we provided no financial help, I took care of Daniel when Caden worked late. Daniel, soon to be a primary school student, proudly showed off his new backpack.
Look at this backpack. It's so cool with this gold part. Thank you, Grandpa and Grandma.
Watching Daniel, full of pride, always brought me joy. My husband and I look forward to supporting Daniel and hope Caden finds a kind and compassionate partner. How did you like this story? Please subscribe to our channel. See you in the next video.
That day, we were having a barbecue in the garden with our daughter and her husband. The warm sunshine filled the air with the aroma of grilling meat. Jason said,
"Oh, we're running out of beer. Nancy, could you get some more from the shed and put them in the fridge?"
"Got it. 4 or 5 bottles, okay?" I replied. My daughter, Emma, then asked her husband,
"Hey, Harrison, can you help Mom? Just chill as many beers as you can."
Harrison smiled and said,
Of course.
and followed me to the shed at the back of the garden. The shed was relatively new, currently holding only a few cardboard boxes of beer. When I opened the door and tried to lift one of the boxes from the dimly lit back, Harrison, who was behind me, suddenly grabbed my shoulders and tried to force me to sit down. Instinctively, I turned my head to look at Harrison's face. Seeing his unusually desperate expression, I instantly felt a surge of fear, thinking he might attack me. "What? Hey, what's going on?" I started to shout in surprise, but Harrison looked a bit panicked and whispered,
I'm sorry. Please, just bear with me for a moment.
"What?" I asked, confused.
I need to confirm something.
Harrison said, his usual gentle smile gone, replaced by an unusually serious gaze. And then, we witnessed an unbelievable sight together. My name is Nancy. It was an early spring day with wonderfully pleasant weather. My husband had passed away after a short illness, leaving for heaven. Since having lost him, my daughter Emma and I have been living a modest yet quiet life together. For several years, it was just the two of us, mother and daughter. Then, through a friend's introduction, I met a man named Jason. Jason was the same age as my late husband and even resembled him slightly in build. At first, Jason and I were just good friends, but over time, we started to develop feelings for each other. However, whenever I found myself walking next to Jason and laughing, I couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of guilt. Jason, with a gentle smile, said,
"There's no need to rush. I'll wait for as long as it takes."
as he walked ahead of me, a little distance away. Though I was drawn to his kindness, I continued to struggle with my inability to fully let go of my husband, who was no longer in this world. It's been 7 years since my husband passed away. After meeting his relatives for the first time in years, I took over the care of his grave and altar. His sister gently placed a hand on my shoulder and said in a very kind voice without meeting my eyes,
Thank you for everything.
with a smile. I bowed my head to hide my overflowing tears, thinking I might never visit my husband's grave again. A few months later, I decided to remarry Jason. We moved to a new home, and I got rid of all my clothes and furniture to start afresh. I felt that keeping any mementos from my previous marriage would hurt Jason. Initially, Emma was a bit hesitant, but gradually she grew closer to Jason. Even before our remarriage, Jason and Emma often spent time together as friends, so she adapted fairly quickly. Emma had just turned 15. At this sensitive age, she started wearing a bit more makeup and going out with friends. Surprisingly, she quickly began to rely on Jason for spending money. Our previous life as just mother and daughter had never been financially comfortable, and I couldn't afford to buy Emma everything she wanted. Jason was indulgent with Emma, unlike me, since I had to be strict about money. He would give her money without asking many questions whenever she said she was going out with friends. When I later cautioned Jason about this, he looked troubled and said,
I'm sorry, but it feels like money is the only way I can connect with Emma right now.
Besides money, Jason continued to treat Emma specially in other ways as well. He treated her like a princess, and it made me happy as if it were for me. Jason was trying his hardest to love both Emma and me. I kept my wedding ring, my last memory of my late husband, tucked away in the deepest part of my closet, occasionally taking it out to look at it. But that began to feel wrong as well. So, I sent the ring to my late husband's parents with a simple letter. I'm sorry, but I want to move forward. Was I allowed to be happy? I didn't know. But I truly wanted to be happy from the bottom of my heart. Eventually, Emma became so close to Jason that she was always by his side and never left him. This made me very happy, but there were also some concerns.
Hey, Dad. I want this new bag, but I'm a little short on pocket money. What should I do?
Emma asked.
Which one? What does it look like?
Jason replied, eagerly looking at the screen of Emma's phone. I caught a glimpse of the screen, which showed a bag from a well-known brand even I recognized. Jason scrolled through the phone and saw the price, then scratched his head with a slightly troubled expression.
It's pretty expensive. But, well, okay. It's for you, Emma.
Really?
Yay!
Thanks, Dad.
Emma exclaimed, hugging Jason, who smiled with pride. Since my marriage, Emma's sense of money had gradually become skewed. Perhaps it was a reaction to our modest life before. She had started asking Jason for things, knowing he would buy anything with a smile. Emma, don't spend so much money carelessly.
It's fine. I'm not asking you, Mom. Right, Dad?
Emma said, looking at Jason, and they both laughed together.
I'm going to marry a handsome and kind man like Dad,
Emma declared. Jason beamed, his face wrinkling with a broad smile. Having secured her promise, Emma returned to her room to study. She hoped to attend nursing school after graduating high school and had already started studying diligently for the entrance exams. To avoid disturbing Emma's studies, I didn't turn on the TV at home, instead placing a small radio in the kitchen and leaving it on. Our life was very happy. I was so happy that I might have forgotten the fact that my previous husband had passed away. But sometimes, when the radio played music from my younger days, memories would flood back. The melodies and lyrics would tighten my chest, bringing me to the verge of tears.
Don't look so sad. It's just a bag,
Jason would say, completely missing the point, and I would give a wry smile. I reminded myself not to keep giving Emma money whenever she asked. Since Jason had started his business at a young age, he would often charge some expenses to the company as business expenses. This wasn't exactly commendable and could affect the company's financial health, so I strongly cautioned him. However, Jason continued to ignore my concerns. Honestly, he's too soft, I thought to myself. As the days went by, Emma successfully enrolled in nursing school. After graduating, she started living on her own. She worked hard as a nurse. When Emma turned 25, she began dating and eventually decided to marry a man her age named Harrison. When Emma first introduced Harrison to us, I was surprised but tried not to show it. Despite Emma always saying,
"I'm going to marry a handsome man."
Harrison was not conventionally handsome, though a nice young man. With his gentle smile and soft demeanor, Harrison was the son of a wealthy family and dressed in a manner that reflected his good upbringing. After their marriage, Emma and Harrison frequently visited us. Harrison was always kind to both Jason and me, and I was genuinely relieved and happy that my daughter had married such a good person. One day, Jason suggested that we have a barbecue in our backyard. The weather was nice, and a few birds were singing in the sky that seemed to go on forever. Jason had been eagerly preparing since early morning and was expertly grilling the meat while chatting happily with Emma. Harrison was looking around, trying to spot the birds singing above. But after a while, he gave up and poured himself a drink. Jason said,
"Oh, we're almost out of beer. Nancy, could you get some more from the shed and put them in the fridge?"
"Sure. 4 or 5 bottles?" I asked. Emma chimed in.
"Hey, Harrison, can you help Mom? Chill as many beers as we have."
With a smile, Harrison replied,
Of course.
and followed me to the shed behind the yard. The shed was relatively new and only had a few boxes of beer stacked inside at the moment. When I opened the door and tried to lift a box from the dimly lit back of the shed, Harrison, who was behind me, forcefully held me down and tried to make me sit on the ground. "Hey! What are you doing?" I exclaimed in surprise, about to raise my voice. But Harrison looked a bit flustered and whispered,
Sorry. Please bear with me for a moment.
"What?" I asked.
I need to confirm something.
He said. Before I could ask what he needed to confirm, he peeked outside from the shed door to check the surroundings. The weather was nice today, and the blue lawn in the garden reflected the sunlight brightly. Jason and Emma probably couldn't see us in the dimly lit shed. While observing Jason and Emma from a distance for a while, I saw Emma move closer, leaning on Jason's arm. She rubbed her face against his upper arm, laughing happily. I could faintly hear their voices. The sound of birds in the sky echoed in the shed, making their voices unclear. Harrison was watching them intently. Could he be jealous of Emma and Jason getting along so well? He seemed to notice me smiling unintentionally, and pointed, saying,
Look.
Emma glanced around a few times and then linked her arm with Jason's. Jason looked a bit flustered but also glanced around before happily accepting Emma. Their interaction seemed more than just a parent-child relationship. The birdsong ceased. With no wind and no sounds of insects, Jason and Emma's voices reached my ears clearly from a distance, though it was faint. Emma said,
Harrison hasn't noticed at all. It's funny, isn't it?
Jason replied,
Well, Nancy hasn't either. People usually don't imagine such things.
Emma continued,
But this kind of relationship is exciting and fun, right?
I listened to their conversation in a daze, unable to understand what was happening. Emma took a transparent bag with powdered medicine from her pocket and lightly mixed it into the glasses that Harrison and I had been drinking from. Did she just put something in our glasses? I asked. Harrison replied,
That's probably a sleeping pill. She recently visited a psychiatrist without telling me.
Sleeping pills? A visit to a psychiatrist without Harrison knowing? I couldn't make sense of it all, But how was I supposed to react to the fact that she had put sleeping pills in our drinks? Harrison said,
Staying here any longer would be strange. Let's go. But don't use those glasses.
After that, Harrison and I pretended to know nothing and returned to Emma and Jason. Emma was acting a bit unnaturally, glancing at my glass several times. The thought that she might be trying to make me drink some strange drug was shocking. I felt betrayed by the daughter I had raised, and the realization made me dizzy. Sorry, but I think I've had a bit too much Sunday. I need to rest inside for a while, I said. Jason responded,
Oh. Okay. I'll take care of the cleanup. You should rest.
Lying on the bed in the room, I stared blankly at the ceiling. Why did she put a sleeping pill in our drinks? And the closeness between Jason and Emma seemed strange. My head throbbed as I wrestled with the possibility that something might be going on and the disbelief that such a thing could be true. After lying down for a while, I fell asleep. As evening approached, I woke up and went out to the garden, where the cleanup was already done. Emma and Harrison seemed to be about to leave. Harrison noticed me, and he looked like he wanted to say something, but then he slowly averted his gaze and kept silent. Jason asked,
Are you feeling better now?
After Harrison and Emma left, Jason showed concern for me as usual. His words, his voice, everything sounded like a lie, and I forced a strange smile.
You still look a bit unwell. Do you want me to make dinner?
Jason offered, rolling up his sleeves and rummaging through the refrigerator. As he did, I recalled seeing Emma putting the sleeping pill in my glass earlier. Pushing Jason aside, I said, I'll cook, and quickly prepared a simple meal. There was no way I could eat anything he made right now. For several days, I hesitated to touch any of the stocked food or drinks in the house, fearing they might be drugged. These thoughts led to suspicions of eavesdropping or hidden cameras, making it increasingly difficult to live in my own home. One day, I received a message from Harrison on my phone. It seems he had consulted his parents about the suspicion of the sleeping pills. Concerned for my safety, Harrison's parents offered to provide a temporary place for me to stay. I feel like I'm going crazy living with Jason right now. I really appreciate the offer, I replied. Harrison said,
It's a relative's cottage, and it won't be used for a while, so you can stay as long as you need. Also, I'd like to have a discussion involving my parents.
Harrison's voice sounded dejected over the phone. It was understandable. His wife might be having an affair with another man. And that man was... No, I didn't want to think about it right now. Later, I lied to Jason, saying, a friend invited me to their cottage. I had already mentioned my persistent headaches since the barbecue, so I told him my friend invited me to rest there. Jason responded,
A cottage, huh? That sounds nice. You should take it easy. Maybe I'll invite Emma over for dinner while you're away.
His casual tone, without a hint of guilt, made me feel a wave of revulsion so intense that it gave me goosebumps. A few days later, I headed to the address Harrison had given me and visited the relative's cottage. After changing trains, I arrived at the station where Harrison picked me up by car.
I'm sorry to make you come all this way,
he said, bowing his head in genuine apology. I felt something stir within me, moved by his kindness in arranging a safe place for me. The area was full of vacation homes, with well-kept but seemingly unoccupied houses scattered among the trees. The cottage stood among these woods. Harrison's parents were waiting for me at the entrance. This was my third time meeting them. The first was for the wedding introduction, the second at the wedding, and this time. I had heard from Emma that they were quite wealthy, which made me feel a bit intimidated. I bowed deeply and expressed my gratitude for providing me with shelter. "Thank you so much," Harrison's father replied.
Sorry to jump right into it, but could we continue this conversation inside?
Once inside the cottage, we immediately began a discussion with Harrison and his parents. Harrison had already told his parents about Emma putting sleeping pills in our drinks. He also explained that it was perplexing how Emma's spending habits were extravagant, surpassing his own salary since their marriage. It was painful for me to hear as her mother. Harrison said,
"We also need to clarify where Emma's money is coming from. My parents propose making a donation to Jason's business and see how he reacts. Would you agree to let us proceed this way?"
The phrase "see how he reacts" made me uneasy. What exactly were we hoping to uncover? What kind of outcome awaited us after taking this step? Sensing my hesitation, Harrison looked me in the eyes and smiled when our gazes met. He continued,
"This might be much ado about nothing, but wouldn't it be worth it to ensure we can live in peace again? Let's take a small risk."
I couldn't help but smile at Harrison's words. Much ado about nothing? No, it definitely wasn't that. We were seeking to confirm what we already suspected, bringing our answers closer to certainty. After a few days at the cottage borrowed from Harrison, I regained my composure and felt uneasy about staying there indefinitely. So, I decided to return home. A few weeks later, Harrison's parents formally contacted Jason's company, offering financial support in the form of a donation. Given their wealth, the offer was quickly trusted, and Jason and Emma were delighted without verifying the details of the funding. I quietly observed their happiness. Back at home, spending time indoors had become somewhat unbearable, so I made walking a daily routine. Just in front of the house was a wheat field, where green stalks of equal height stretched out as far as the eye could see. Walking along the sparsely trafficked, asphalt-paved road, I looked up at the distant birds in flight. After the proposal for financial support, Jason and Emma began living lavishly. Jason, under the impression that he had already received the funds, purchased a luxury car under the guise of a company vehicle. Emma, on the other hand, indulged in extravagant expenses like spa treatments and manicures. It was evident that Jason's naive expectation of incoming funds was the basis for their continued spending, even as their savings dwindled. One day, we arranged a dinner party to discuss the funding. Both couples, Jason and me, Emma and Harrison, along with Harrison's parents, gathered at our home. Jason bowed repeatedly, ingratiating himself with Harrison's parents. Jason said,
"I really can't thank Harrison enough. Emma always says she's so happy to have married such a wonderful person."
Jason continued his flattery, but Harrison's parents didn't return his smiles. Instead, they quietly placed some documents on the table. Jason, thinking they were related to the donation, said excitedly,
Thank you.
Before looking through them. His face quickly turned pale. Harrison's father said,
Upon conducting a due diligence review of your company for the funding, we uncovered some shocking facts.
Sweat broke out on Jason's face as he read the documents. The contents revealed two main issues: evidence of a relationship between Jason and Emma, and a tax investigation into the expenses reported as company costs. Seeing proof that my daughter had been involved with my husband made me want to cover my face in shame. The expenses for Emma's jewelry, spa treatments, and other indulgences had all been falsely reported as business expenses, resulting in back taxes. Harrison's father continued.
We cannot provide funding to a company engaged in such fraudulent activities.
Jason stammered.
But this can't be.
In his agitation, Jason spilled his tea. Emma was nearby and shakily stood up to wipe the mess with trembling hands.
Emma, I'm divorcing you, and I'll be claiming damages.
Huh? What? What do you mean by damages?
You cheated on me. Isn't that obvious? And Nancy, too.
Saying this, Harrison looked at me. Jason's gaze shifted from the documents to me, his eyes filled with fear. I'll also be divorcing Jason and claiming damages. Of course.
What are you talking about? That's impossible.
Jason's voice faltered as he trembled, dropping the documents to the floor. Emma, with a frightened expression, approached Jason and pointed at Harrison, her lips quivering.
No. No, it's not true. It was Harrison who cheated. Harrison and Mom.
Until the very end, Emma made incomprehensible excuses resembling screams and repeated attempts to shift blame. Despite Jason and Emma's desperate attempts at excuses, there was solid evidence against them, leaving no room for escape. Eventually, Jason lowered his shoulders in resignation and began to speak quietly. Jason admitted that he began a relationship with Emma, but he realized there was no love involved. Initially, he rejected Emma, who approached him for money purposes. However, he eventually weighed Emma's increasingly feminine appearance against my aging and diminishing charm and came to a decision.
I'm a man too. We're not even blood related. I couldn't resist.
Jason said. It was Emma who suggested putting sleeping pills in our drinks on the barbecue day. After drugging me and Harrison, she planned to undress us, put us in the same bed, and take photos to demand damages. How shallow of them. Beyond contempt, I looked at them with cold eyes.
I'm really sorry. Please forgive me. I beg you.
I'm so sorry too. I don't want to break up with Harrison.
I just watched the two of them bow their heads without saying a word. Words escaped me. It's not like I should forgive. How could I forgive? Emma, growing impatient with my silence, finally raised her face and forcefully grabbed Jason's sleeve, pulling him.
It's your fault. How could this happen? I have credit card payments due next week, and what are you going to do about it?
What? What do you mean by buying things on your own? I've been using credit card loans to pay off my losses at slot, and I'm broke! What the hell are we going to do?
This chaos was exactly what they meant by a scene. Emma continued her rough behavior of forcefully pulling Jason's hair and clothes, while Jason desperately tried to stop her shouting. Surely, this shouting must be reaching the ears of the neighbors. Even if it's a matter of obligation, if it's revealed that they had a parent-child relationship, one couldn't continue living here with normal nerves. It was probably the same for me. I couldn't help but feel a little lonely at the thought that I wouldn't be able to see the scenery outside the window anymore. Afterward, Emma divorced Harrison and moved far away. She fell into the nightlife, but her life didn't go well, and she drowned in alcohol and accumulated more debt. Jason was pursued by debt collectors after paying a large alimony, and his company went bankrupt. He disappeared in a state close to fleeing at night and was reportedly living as a homeless person, hiding from his creditors. Harrison learned from his failed marriage and found a good match after divorcing Emma. I received alimony from Jason. It was unclear how he managed to prepare such a large amount of alimony despite his company going bankrupt and being pursued by debt collectors, but he showed some sense of responsibility at the very end. After divorcing Jason and selling our house, I decided to return to my parents' home. On the plane back to my hometown, I thought about many things. I lost my first husband to illness, remarried, divorced again, and was betrayed by my own daughter. I wondered how I should face my parents this time. Surrounding my childhood home were vast fields of wheat. Pulling my large suitcase, I walked down the long asphalt road. The weather was warm and humid, and early summer was approaching. When I returned home, my parents welcomed me without asking any questions. I wondered why my elderly parents didn't ask me anything. Were they pitying me? Yet, they didn't treat me as if I were fragile. They accepted me naturally. As I gazed at the peaceful countryside, I realized I needed to reassess my life. With my father's help, I got a job at the local agricultural cooperative, so I think I've established a foundation for my life. Since then, I've built a good relationship with Harrison's parents. Although we don't meet often, we sometimes have meals together when they're nearby. What? A few years after I returned to my parents' home, in the spring, something unexpected happened. On the desk lay the wedding ring given to me by my late husband. I was a bit shaken as I picked up the ring and looked at it in my palm. While I stood there in a daze, my mother, with her bent back, came from the kitchen and wiped the table.
A long time ago, his parents came by. They said they wanted you to have this, Nancy.
I stood there speechless. Outside the window, the wheat fields stretched out. Beyond the clear blue sky, a bird chirped persistently, as if to assert, "I am here." Tears fell as I slung my bag over my shoulder and rode off on my bicycle. I continued through the empty wheat fields, sweat beading on my forehead. What should I do from now on? I don't know, but I will keep moving forward. I'll save my complaints for when I've lived my life to the fullest.